Hi everyone! For this month's terrifying trio, we're diving into the murky realm of hidden evil. The secrets uncovered in the following movies and books all lead to doom for some or all of the characters involved, but all parties find themselves compelled to delve deeper, look closer, and try to understand the horrifying forces that have been buried, lying dormant, just waiting to be uncovered. Content warning. The following movies and books discussed contain graphic violence, death, scenes of body horror and blood loss, immolation, decapitation, stabbings, death by gunshot, and more. Viewer and reader discretion is advised. Also, spoilers ahead for both films and the books I discuss here. This month's first movie is Evil Dead Rise, the fifth installment in the Evil Dead franchise. I quite enjoy the Evil Dead, and if you've seen any or all of these movies, you will not be surprised by what happens to our hapless heroes. First, we have a short introductory scene, in which a young man named Caleb has a drone. This provides one of the point-of-view shots you get at one or more points in all Evil Dead films. Caleb has come to a cabin by a lake with his girlfriend Jessica and her cousin Teresa, who is annoyed with Caleb. When she goes inside to check on her cousin, who has been ill since they arrived, Jessica rises from her sick bed and rips off Teresa's scalp. She then decapitates Caleb, and while she seems momentarily subdued after plunging into the lake, Jessica then rises from the water, floating above it in a haunting display of otherworldly power. Next, we go back in time to the previous night. We meet Beth, who has just discovered that she's pregnant, and because of this, she goes to visit her sister Ellie. Ellie shares an apartment with her three kids, Bridget, Danny, both teenagers, and the youngest, Cassie. Their Los Angeles apartment has been condemned, but they're still living there while looking for a new place to live. And while the three kids go to pick up pizza for dinner, allowing time for the adult sisters to reconnect, an earthquake hits, revealing what looks to be a former bank vault hidden beneath the building's underground parking garage. Though Bridget warns her younger brother repeatedly not to venture below, Danny does, and finds tons of crosses, old phonograph records, and a strange book, which he brings upstairs. The book is, of course, one of the Naturom de Monto, a book bound with human flesh, as with other books discovered in this movie series. Danny plays one of the phonograph records he found on the record player in his room, and learns that it's an account of priests from 1923 who tried to understand the book's power. An incantation that summons deadites is recited by the man who made the recording. Only on a later record is it revealed that the book was sealed underground when the priests found it too powerful and deadly. Meanwhile, Ellie is possessed by an invisible force that moves her body violently inside the building's elevator. She returns to her apartment, only to die soon after. Her final words are to Beth, begging her to protect her children, and Beth spends the rest of the film trying to keep this promise. Soon, Beth and the three kids, along with some neighbors, discover that the earthquake has trapped them in the building. The fire escape is inaccessible, the elevator no longer works, and the stairwell has collapsed. Also, it's raining heavily outside, so when they try and shout for help from passers-by, no one hears them. Luckily, one neighbor has a cat that gets into a crawl space above the hallway, and I'll tell you right now that the cat doesn't die, but humans soon do. Ellie, or whatever force has taken up residence in her body, soon springs up and tries to kill her family. Even when they lock her out of the apartment, she manages to convince Cassie to open the door. She then attacks the terrified child. Danny and Beth get the door shut, but Bridget, who was previously wounded by Ellie, finds herself becoming the deadites' next victim. Danny eventually reveals to Beth the items he discovered beneath the parking garage. This is only after Bridget is also consumed by the deadite contagion. Convinced that there are bugs in her stomach, she begins eating glass. After Bridget attacks Danny and Beth, Danny impales his sister on the handle of a broom, and she seems to die. But then she rises and mortally wounds Danny, who sets her on fire before he dies, leaving only Beth and Cassie alive. Listening to the second phonograph record in Danny's room reveals to Beth that only destroying Ellie's body will stop the spread of the evil. The Deadite, formerly known as Ellie, gets back inside through the crawl space and tries to rip out the fetus inside Beth. Cassie and Beth work together and fend off Ellie with a pair of scissors. And though the Ellie Deadite tries to manipulate Cassie again, the girl has now realized that her mom is truly gone. As Beth and Cassie flee to the broken elevator, the bodies of the dead, including Ellie, Bridget, Danny, and some of the neighbors, merge into one horrible creature from the Naturom de Monto. Called the Marauder, this creature taunts the two remaining humans, but its human centipede-like physique ends up inadvertently helping them. Its weight sends the broken elevator crashing down into the garage. There, though Cassie is captured by the creature and is nearly decapitated by a chainsaw, Beth is able to draw its attention. The pair then force the beast into a wood chipper parked in the garage. Ellie's severed head remains and taunts Beth about her impending failure as a mother, so Beth kicks it into the wood chipper. After a night of intense struggle, at the end of which they are drenched in blood, Beth and Cassie escape the garage. This is the point at which Jessica appears and is possessed by the invisible evil she then takes to the lake. Are some apartments in LA so weathered and chaotic that Jessica really wouldn't notice the carnage described above? Maybe it helps that it was a very rainy night, so she didn't hear the violence on the floor below her. And parking garages are notoriously large spaces where most of us don't linger, though I hope a blood-soaked wood chipper would catch my eye. This film is one of the best reviewed and is the most financially successful Evil Dead film so far. It's fun, bloody, and the women of this cast really get to shine, both as deadites and as badass heroes. Ash Williams is the undisputed protagonist of the first three films, and the 2013 reboot, though it had its moments, was simply a reboot of the original, and didn't feature any memorable characters, beyond final girl Mia. I give this film 3 horrifying deadites out of 4. Our second film this month is The Last Voyage of the Demeter. Part of the novel Dracula, this section of the novel, in the form of a newspaper article and the captain's log, is only a brief sliver of the novel. In his log, the captain writes that, one by one, his crew is disappearing. Eventually, the first mate leaps overboard as they're approaching the coast of England, and the captain, before lashing himself to the tiller of his doomed vessel, concludes that the first mate must have been the murderer who killed the rest of the crew. But of course, the killer was Dracula, who was drinking the blood of the men to survive the ocean crossing. Here, we get more details about the Demeter's crew. And in a fun twist, the movie was released right around the time that this section of the book is taking place, in August. The captain, a man named Elliot, is traveling with his grandson, Toby, and we learn that his daughter has died, and now he wants this to be his last voyage, so he won't have to raise the boy at sea. The first mate, Wojciech, will then become the captain, but in the meantime, they need to hire an extra hand for their journey from Bulgaria to England. When the ship arrives in Varna, Bulgaria, we know that in 4 weeks' time, it will be discovered, wrecked and empty on the English coast. Their cargo will be intact, though. All the ship was carrying was 50 boxes of Bulgarian dirt. Of course, one of these boxes contained something else. The man hired to work on the Demeter in Varna is a man named Clemens. He is black, and we eventually learn that though he attended college at Cambridge and became a doctor, no one will hire a man of his color. He came to Bulgaria because he was offered a post as royal physician by mail, but he was turned away as soon as they saw him. Wojciech didn't wish to hire Clemens, who he saw as too scholarly to be useful as a sailor, but the first man hired abruptly quit when he saw the symbol of a dragon on a box of dirt as it was loaded into the ship. So, the captain invites Clemens to work as a sailor and the ship's doctor for the duration of the voyage. Clemens is given a tour of the ship by Toby, who is in charge of caring for the animals on board. Toby demonstrates that the crew sometimes communicate by knocking on the ship's timber. 2 knocks mean that all is well. this soon ceases to be true as Dracula starts knocking to distract his quarry. One night, a strange figure is spotted on deck, but it's too dark to see properly. A crate breaks open in the hold soon after, and when Clemens goes to investigate the noise, he finds a woman. While much of the crew reacts to news of a stowaway with hostility, Clemens doesn't share their superstitions about women on ships being bad luck. He then gives her blood transfusions for several days to restore her health. This was not something that was done in 1897, but it's a fictional vampire movie, so you should really just relax. Not long after leaving port, once they're a little ways out to sea, all the animals, including the ship's dog, Huckleberry, are discovered dead. Toby feels guilty about this, since it was his job to take care of them. The men aboard try to rationalize the situation, saying that Huck must have gone rabid and killed the other animals they brought to eat during the journey. The money they have been promised for getting the cargo to England on time or early amounts to a small fortune, so all agree to press on, in spite of their rations now being reduced and the atmosphere aboard the ship suddenly becoming more sinister than before. Anna, the woman believed to be a stowaway, awakens and warns the crew that a creature called Dracula is aboard the ship. She explains to Clemens that she was given to the beast as a food source, and then shows several bite marks on her body. Clemens doesn't believe that such a supernatural creature could exist, but now that the vampire has lost Anna as his food source, he begins hunting at night. The first man to be fed upon, Olgarin, soon becomes Dracula's thrall. The crew find him bleeding on the deck, but his violent outbursts cause them to tie him to a table while Clemens stitches up the wound on his neck. Later, Olgarin escapes and pursues Toby into the captain's quarters, where, in spite of having a cross in his hand, he's bitten by Dracula before his grandfather and the crew can break down the locked door. Olgarin, who is subdued and then tied to the mast, bursts into flames at sunrise and dies screaming in pain. In spite of blood transfusions from the captain, Toby soon dies, and Anna gives a kind eulogy as the crew prepares to bury the boy at sea. However, the captain thinks he sees the sheet that Toby's been wrapped in move, and he uncovers his grandson. Toby's eyes then pop open, and he attacks his grandfather. But since it's daylight, he promptly bursts into flames and burns the captain badly before being tossed overboard. Is he dead, or just an undersea vampiric thrall now? I wasn't quite sure. At this point, though Clemens still wants there to be a rational, scientific explanation for all this, everyone agrees that there is something terrible aboard the Demeter that must be stopped. At first, Wojciech doesn't want to destroy the ship, but it's agreed that whatever is aboard, man, monster, or demon, must not reach England and continue its killing spree. Anna and Clemens speak with the captain, who wants to believe that Toby is still alive or could somehow be brought back, thanks to the whispers of Dracula, and they convince him that the promises of their foe cannot be trusted. The captain keeps the cross that was Toby's, and eventually decides to go down with his ship. Meanwhile, the ship's cook, who believes the crew is being punished for various sins, attempts to escape in a lifeboat, only to be killed by Dracula, who has now sprouted a monstrous pair of bat-like wings. By now, it's the final night, and the survivors aboard the Demeter have agreed to a plan. While Wojciech manages to begin the process of sinking the ship as they approach the coast, attacking the timbers below deck with an axe, he is soon killed by Dracula. It isn't long before only Anna and Clemens remain, and the ship is engulfed in fog, making their plan, which involved being able to see the thing they were trying to fight, a moot point. Anna is a skilled shot with a rifle, but bullets don't seem to be effective against the vampire. What finally proves effective is Clemens taunting Dracula. He points out that the vampire is no god or demon. He must eat, and he fears the sun, and thus he is mortal and killable. While both surviving humans are injured, Clemens manages to save Anna by hitting Dracula with an axe, and then Anna partially crushes the vampire under a broken section of mast. There's no lifeboat left at this point, but the two are able to float away on a broken piece of the ship. Soon after, when the Demeter reaches the English coast, the crash knocks the mast loose, and Dracula frees himself from the beached vessel. Back at sea, Anna reveals that Clement's blood transfusions only delayed the inevitable. She's becoming a vampire herself. After living in the shadow of Dracula her whole life, she chooses to face the sunrise and die a fiery death before she can become like him. Clemens eventually reaches England, and we meet him in a tavern, where he's drawing Anna in his notebook. Suddenly he hears 2 knocks on timber, the signal from the Demeter that was co-opted by Dracula. The vampire, now dressed in fine clothes and a top hat, before he was naked, hairless, and bat-like, makes eye contact, smiles, then ventures out into the night. Clemens follows him, determined to stop the vampire, in the name of those who died aboard the Demeter. And then the movie ends. I enjoyed this film, but I admittedly went into it expecting everyone to die. By the end, I was glad that Clemens survived, and I enjoyed the idea of his teaming up with the heroes of the novel to defeat Dracula, though the racism of the time and place in which Dracula is set would probably preclude this. Written in 1897 and taking place mostly in England, Dracula as a novel is often racist. Anna as a character is very different from the Romany people portrayed in the book, who are nameless and are allowed none of the agency of this film's heroine. Dracula himself is often described with racist language. His invasion of England is a metaphor for the uncivilized people of the East coming to spoil the civilized West. Yes, as long as imperialism has existed, Europeans and Americans have participated in colonialism, then fretted hypocritically about immigration back home. I could go into great detail on this subject. I was an English major, and I enjoy 19th century novels and stories, but I also wrote my senior thesis on how imperialism and the resulting addiction to empire and all its luxuries has caused harm and havoc all over the globe for centuries. If you're reading Dracula this year for Dracula Daily, or if you just enjoy boilerplate horror movies with good casts and interesting ideas, a vampire that's only weak to the sun, why are crosses ineffective? Check out this film. I saw it at the drive-in, which can make so-so movies good and good movies great. The vibe of the drive-in for horror movies especially is impeccable. I rate this 3 immolated corpses out of 5. Our book this month is McCall Ostow's Amity. This novel is based on the media franchise that is the Amityville Horror, though it's not an official tie-in. And this isn't the suburban home one might recognize from the films. This house sits by itself on the bank of a river in New England, and its isolated nature is a key aspect of the story. The novel features 2 protagonists, Connor and Gwen. We know that these 2 both move into the same old house, 10 years apart. Neither of their families live there for long, though. In fact, after 28 days, both families leave, after experiencing strange phenomena that culminates in a violent incident. Connor comes to the house first. He is one of 3 siblings. He has a twin sister, Jules, who is in many ways his conscience, and a 6-year-old brother, Abel. When they move into the house with their parents, it immediately becomes clear that something about the place is strange. It's always cold, and Connor wakes up at the same time every night, 3:14 a.m. And though he initially thought the cheap sign his mom purchased, which simply says Amity, was dumb, he quickly comes to love the house. Not in spite of its unsettling quirks, but because of them. Connor almost immediately starts hearing and seeing things that, for most people, would be unsettling. He has violent nightmares, sees bloody, gory images in his bedroom window and in the bathroom mirror, and the door of the old boathouse outside, which swings open and shut in the middle of the night, reminds him of the sound of a gunshot. Connor isn't sure why he makes that comparison, but it doesn't bother him. In fact, Connor feels a strange fondness for his new home. He feels as if it's almost alive, as if it knows who he is and wants him to be there. It's important to note that Connor is not like most people. He hates his father, whose sketchy business deals and abusive tendencies are a key factor in the move to Amity. He cares about Jules, and as his twin, she knows him better than anyone. But there are still things she doesn't know about what's going on in Connor's head. The more time he spends in the house, the more he becomes convinced that things need to change, violently if necessary, and he feels that the house will help him in this. Connor starts digging holes in the dirt floor of the basement. He isn't sure where this compulsion comes from, but he has a sense that if he keeps looking, he'll find something. something important. Eventually, he finds a shotgun, and Connor resolves to take care of his father, once and for all. But on the 28th day of his time in Amity, things don't go as planned. Structurally, this novel features something I love, skips back and forth in time between different narrators. So, at the same time we're getting to know Connor, we're getting to know Gwen. She and her family, her parents and older brother, Luke, move into Amity after Gwen experiences something strange and hard to explain. While her parents are convinced that there must be a logical explanation, and they attribute Gwen's recent episode to some kind of mental health crisis, the reader gets a sense from Gwen's narration that there's something supernatural going on. Still, we know they have come to Amity looking for a fresh start, and that things are soon going to change, but not for the better. Almost immediately, Gwen starts seeing things that are similar to what Connor witnessed in Amity 10 years prior. The difference is that she's terrified. A ghoulish face in the mirror isn't just horrifying. It makes Gwen worry that she really is losing her grasp of reality. And at the same time, Luke, her biggest source of support, starts to behave oddly. He becomes uncharacteristically distant, and he starts digging holes in the basement. Eventually, Gwen finds a sort of scrapbook down in the basement. Photocopies, newspaper articles, and other ephemera detail the house's violent history. The original Native American inhabitants were murdered by settlers, who in turn died in other unsettling ways. In fact, it seems that as long as there has been any sort of dwelling on this particular stretch of riverbank, those that live there can't do so for long before they begin to meet violent ends. Gwen learns from a newspaper article that someone died in the house 10 years ago, and that the family who lived there then didn't even last a month. As the novel goes on, it becomes clear that Gwen needs to get her family out of Amity, but her parents don't believe her. Even if it weren't for the events in her recent past, Gwen knows that getting them to leave the house they've just moved into because something maybe supernatural is going on would be a hard sell for most parents. And her brother Luke is changing. Gwen knows that the house has some kind of dangerous influence over him, but she has less than a month to figure out how to stop the house from claiming more victims. Luckily, Gwen has one ally, the spirit of someone who died in Amity years ago. Meanwhile, in Connor's sections of the book, his narration is leading towards a violent crescendo. But the whole novel, you read and wonder, what happened with Connor's family on day 28? What happens with Gwen's? Who dies, and can Gwen's knowledge of the past help her in the future? This delightfully creepy novel, while not the goriest, ratchets up the tension by focusing on the fact that the protagonists, both teens, don't have much agency in their lives. Unable to escape their parents, whether they're abusive or simply oblivious, they're trapped both geographically and psychologically. And this, of course, is what Amity wants. The house is a living thing, and it has a hunger that can only be sated by blood. I give this novel 2 would-be murderers out of 3. Evil is an interesting concept in horror. We see less of a connection with religion in stories produced in the 21st century. This, it would certainly seem, reflects a loss of faith and trust in religious institutions. Given our knowledge of the abuses that have run rampant and have been concealed over centuries, particularly in the Catholic Church, it's little wonder that religious symbols are wholly ineffective against the evils faced in this month's movies. I would argue that today, evil is treated almost like a force of nature, a sort of natural disaster. In these movies and novels, it's kind of elemental. And like a disastrous weather event, there is only so much one can do to prepare. Generally, people are caught unawares when they uncover hidden evil, and like someone rushing to take shelter from an approaching tornado, even if an individual survives, the damage done is still devastating, and though property can be mended or rebuilt, lives lost cannot be restored. We hope that the truth will set us free, but these tales remind us that no one gets out of this world alive. Like protagonists in stories, we humans spend our lives knowing that death is inevitable. But in the meantime, it's worth struggling and striving, even when we know we're doomed, to help those we love, or even total strangers, to have a better, less nightmarish existence. For me, horror is comforting in this way. It confirms that yes, there are many horrible things about the world in which we live. Many things are deeply wrong. But it's possible, and even heroic, to fight evil. Because improbable as it often seems, change is possible. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back again soon with another terrifying trio.